The Dirty Duchess, Margaret Campbell's scandalous fall. March 22nd, 1951. Caxton Hall Registry Office, London. The flashbulbs explode like artillery fire. Margaret Wigham Sweeney stands at the threshold of transformation, draped in white silk, about to become the Duchess of Argyll. 3 strands of pearls rest against her throat, her signature, her armor, her eventual undoing. Behind the champagne smiles and congratulatory embraces, nobody can see what's coming. Not the society photographers who've immortalized her since she was 15. Not the aristocrats who've watched her climb from American heiress to British nobility. And certainly not Margaret herself, who believes, with every fiber of her being, that she has finally arrived at the summit of everything she was meant to be. She couldn't have been more wrong. Within 12 years, those same pearls would become evidence in what the British press would call the divorce of the century. Within 12 years, her name would be synonymous not with elegance, but with scandal. And within 12 years, a locked drawer in her Mayfair home would be broken into, its contents scattered across courtroom floors and newspaper front pages, turning one of the most photographed women in the world into the most condemned. This is the story of Margaret Campbell, the debutante who had everything, the Duchess who lost it all. The woman who, in death, remains frozen in infamy, forever the Dirty Duchess who rocked high society to its foundations and paid a price that no man ever would. Part 1. The Golden Girl. December 1st, 1912. Newton Mearns, Scotland. Ethel Margaret Wigham enters the world already positioned for privilege. Her father, George Hay Wigham, is a self-made millionaire, chairman of the Celanese Corporation, turning artificial silk into genuine fortune. Her mother, Helen, obsesses over the child's appearance with unsettling intensity, rationing even Margaret's reading time for fear glasses might diminish her beauty. The girl learns early. Appearance is currency. Beauty is power. And in her world, these are the only currencies that matter. At 2 years old, Margaret crosses the Atlantic. New York City becomes her kingdom. She attends the Hewitt School, rubbing shoulders with America's gilded youth, the children of Vanderbilts and Astors, future inheritors of empires built on steel and oil and railroad tracks. But even among this constellation of privilege, Margaret shines differently. Those green eyes, that porcelain skin, the confidence that radiates from her like heat from summer pavement. By 14, she's back in London, and the city takes notice immediately. 1928, the Isle of Wight, summer holiday. Margaret is 15. The boy watching her is 18. Handsome, charming, destined for Hollywood stardom under the name David Niven. Their parents are distracted, occupied with their own pursuits, and the teenagers find ample opportunity to explore territories that society insists should remain unmapped. One encounter, one mistake, one pregnancy. When Margaret tells her parents, hell breaks loose. The family cook will later recall those words exactly. All hell broke loose. George Wigham, self-made millionaire accustomed to solving problems with money and will, faces a problem that threatens everything he's built. His daughter, his only child, his jewel, is pregnant and unwed in an era where such things destroy families entirely. The solution is swift and secret. A London nursing home, a procedure performed in shadows. 30 years before Margaret writes her memoir, this chapter will be omitted entirely. Some shame cuts too deep for even paper to hold, but Margaret recovers. Margaret always recovers. 1930. London, the coming out season. On May 1st, Margaret hosts her debutante ball at Audley Square. The cost, £40,000, a fortune that would buy houses, cars, entire futures for ordinary families. The music, Bert Ambrose and his orchestra, the height of sophistication. The dress, not traditional white, but forget-me-not blue tulle, designed by Norman Hartnell. Already, Margaret refuses to follow convention. Already she understands that being remembered matters more than being proper. The court names her Debutante of the Year. London society opens its arms. She becomes a fixture at the Embassy Club on Old Bond Street, the 400 Club in Leicester Square. Her evenings follow a pattern: dinner with one suitor, feigned exhaustion, a chauffeur-driven escape, then dancing with another man entirely. 3 parties a night. Heaven, she'll later say. Undiluted heaven. Her lovers read like a who's who of international power and glamour. Prince Ali Khan showers her with attention and gifts. Max Aitken, publishing heir, proposes marriage. She's briefly engaged to Charles Greville, the Earl of Warwick. But it's Glenn Kidston, married aviator, dangerous and unavailable, who truly captures her imagination. Then, in the spring of 1931, Kidston's plane disintegrates mid-flight during a dust storm. Margaret is devastated, but Margaret always recovers. She rebounds into the arms of Charles Sweeney, American businessman, amateur golfer, wealthy beyond measure. They marry in 1933 in a ceremony so glamorous that 3,000 Londoners try to crash it. P.G. Wodehouse rewrites Cole Porter's "You're the Top" for the British stage, changing the lyrics to reference Mrs. Sweeney. She has arrived officially as a cultural icon, but beneath the silk and champagne, darkness gathers. Part 2. The Fall. The miscarriages begin almost immediately. 1, 2, 3. By the time Margaret reaches 8, the psychological scars run deeper than any physical wound. Then, in late 1933, she carries a baby to 8 months. She prepares the nursery. She allows herself to hope. The baby girl is stillborn. Margaret tries again. Eventually, she'll have 2 more children with Sweeney, but something inside her has fractured. Friends notice subtle changes. Her humor, always limited, vanishes entirely. Her focus, always on appearance, becomes obsessive. She calls herself a bird brain, embraces her vanity like a religion. Then, 1943. Everything changes. Old Bond Street, a medical building, an elevator shaft. We don't know exactly what happened. The mechanics of the accident remain unclear, but the facts are undeniable. Margaret plummets 40 feet down an elevator shaft, her body hurtling through darkness toward concrete below. Her fingernails, later found torn and bloody, suggest she grabbed the elevator cable, which breaks her fall just enough to keep her alive. 33 stitches close the wound in her skull. Days blur together in hospital recovery. When she finally goes home, Charles Sweeney insists the woman who returns is not the wife he married. The fall, he claims, has fundamentally altered her personality, made her erratic, impulsive, hypersexual. Whether the trauma genuinely rewired Margaret's brain, or whether Sweeney simply found a convenient excuse for behavior he could no longer control, this question haunts the rest of her story. The marriage ends in 1947, but Margaret always recovers, and this time, she's aiming higher. Part 3. The Duchess, 1950. A train from Paris. Margaret meets Ian Douglas Campbell, heir to the Duke of Argyll, chief of Clan Campbell, master of Inverary Castle, one of Scotland's most historic and crumbling estates. He's 47, twice divorced, traumatized from years as a prisoner of war in Germany. His previous wives describe him as violent, cruel, addicted to alcohol and prescription medication. His gambling debts are legendary. To Margaret, he's perfect. A duke, a title, the final piece of the puzzle. To Ian, she's perfect too. An heiress, a bank account, the solution to his financial catastrophe. They marry on March 22nd, 1951. Margaret becomes the Duchess of Argyll. She writes later, "I had wealth, I had good looks. I had become a duchess and mistress of a historic castle. Life was apparently roses all the way. The roses have thorns." Ian begins siphoning Margaret's money immediately, pouring it into Inverary Castle's restoration. He refers to her, privately, as S for Satan. She retaliates by forging letters claiming his children from previous marriages are illegitimate. She even attempts to acquire a baby boy from Poland to pass off as their legitimate heir, a scheme so bizarre it collapses under its own absurdity. The Duke grows paranoid. He has Margaret's car wiretapped, tracking her movements obsessively. She stays out later, becomes more distant. The marriage, barely 3 years old, is already a war zone. Then, Ian notices the locked drawer in Margaret's room at their Mayfair home, 48 Upper Grosvenor Street. He fantasizes about its contents, his paranoia blooming into obsession. One day, while Margaret visits New York, Ian makes his decision. He calls a locksmith. The drawer opens. Inside, 13 Polaroid photographs. The images show Margaret, identifiable by her 3-strand pearl necklace and little else, in various states of intimacy, with men whose faces are carefully cropped from the frame. One photograph in particular will become infamous. Margaret performing a sex act on a man whose head is missing from the shot. The headless man enters history. Part 4. The Trial, 1963. London. The divorce case begins. Ian Campbell files for divorce on grounds of adultery, claiming Margaret has slept with 88 men during their marriage. He submits the Polaroids as evidence. The press, already salivating over the Profumo scandal, descends like wolves on fresh meat. The Dirty Duchess headlines scream across front pages. Every detail of Margaret's sex life becomes public property. The courtroom transforms into theatre, with Margaret as the starring villain in a morality play written by men who've committed the same acts without consequence. Judge Lord Wheatley delivers his verdict with sneering contempt. Margaret is a completely promiscuous woman whose sexual appetite could only be satisfied with a number of men. His words drip with disgust, his judgment absolute. Nobody questions Ian's infidelities. Nobody examines his theft of private photographs, what we'd now call revenge porn. Nobody considers that Margaret's sexual behavior might simply be freedom rather than depravity. In 1963, Britain, teetering on the edge of the sexual revolution but not quite ready to leap, Margaret represents everything society claims to want in women: beauty, elegance, sophistication, combined with everything it cannot forgive: desire, autonomy, refusal to apologize. The identity of the headless man becomes a national obsession. Lord Denning, already investigating the Profumo affair, is assigned to track him down. He compiles a short list of 5 suspects: Douglas Fairbanks Jr., the Hollywood legend; Duncan Sandys, Minister of Defense and Winston Churchill's son-in-law; American businessman John Cohane; Peter Combe, press officer at the Savoy Hotel; and Sigismund von Braun, German diplomat. Denning analyzes handwriting from captions on other Polaroids: before, thinking of you; during, finished. His conclusion reportedly identifies Fairbanks, but he never includes this in his official report. The document is sealed until 2063. Margaret never reveals the truth, not during the trial, not in her memoir, not on her deathbed. Some historians believe she protected multiple men, including closeted gay lovers who would have faced criminal prosecution. Others think she enjoyed keeping the secret, maintaining one final piece of power in a situation that stripped her of everything else. The divorce is granted. Margaret is free. But freedom tastes like ash. Part 5. The Aftermath. The years that follow are a slow-motion collapse. Margaret's money evaporates. Legal fees, poor investments, an extravagant lifestyle she cannot maintain but refuses to abandon. The title, Duchess of Argyll, means nothing without the fortune to support it. In the 1970s, desperate for income, she opens 48 Upper Grosvenor Street for paid tours. £7.50 per person, including champagne served by her butler. Come see where the scandal happened. Come gawk at the bathroom where those photographs were taken. The tours fail. 1975. She publishes her memoir, Forget Not. Critics savage it for name-dropping and entitlement. Nobody wants to read a scandal-plagued duchess defending herself. They want the monster they've created in their imaginations. 1978. Debt forces her from Upper Grosvenor Street to a suite at the Grosvenor House Hotel, where she continues entertaining paying guests over Bucks Fizz for £15.95. 1988. She appears on Channel 4's After Dark to discuss horse racing. Midway through, she walks off stage, claiming exhaustion. The cracks are showing. 1990. Evicted from the hotel for unpaid bills, she moves into a modest apartment arranged by her children and first husband, Charles Sweeney. The woman who once hosted parties for 3,000 now lives in rooms that would fit inside her former bathroom. By the early 90s, Margaret can no longer care for herself. Her children place her in a nursing home in Pimlico. She's 80 years old, frail, her beauty, that currency she spent a lifetime accumulating, finally depleted. Then, the final fall. Not 40 feet this time, just a bathroom floor. But at 80, her body cannot absorb the impact. Her neck breaks. Unlike the elevator shaft 60 years earlier, this time there's no recovery. Margaret Campbell, Duchess of Argyll, dies on July 25, 1993. She's buried beside Charles Sweeney at Brookwood Cemetery in Woking, Surrey. Not beside the Duke of Argyll, not in Scotland among the Campbells, but next to her first husband, the American who married her before she became a duchess, before she became notorious, before she became the Dirty Duchess. Epilogue. The legacy. What do we do with Margaret Campbell now, 3 decades after her death? The easy answer is to see her as a cautionary tale. A beautiful woman destroyed by her own appetites, a socialite who flew too close to the sun. This is comfortable, familiar. It requires nothing from us except judgment. The harder answer demands we reconsider everything. In 2022, what Ian Campbell did would be called revenge porn, a criminal act. In 1963, it was called evidence. Margaret's stolen private photographs were published, dissected, used to destroy her reputation, while the men in those images remained protected, unnamed, unpunished. Duncan Sandys offered to resign from the cabinet, then was quietly cleared by Lord Denning's investigation. Douglas Fairbanks denied everything until death. The identities of the other 86 men Ian accused Margaret of sleeping with remain speculation. Only Margaret was condemned. Only Margaret became the Dirty Duchess. Only Margaret paid the price. The double standard is staggering. Ian Campbell's infidelities barely rated a mention in the divorce proceedings. His violence toward previous wives was noted and dismissed. His theft of private photographs was never questioned. Margaret's sexual behavior, by modern standards, unremarkable, was deemed disgusting by a judge whose moral authority went unexamined. Consider this. Margaret protected her lovers, even when naming them might have salvaged her reputation. She understood that outing closeted gay men. In 1963, Britain would destroy them. She chose honour over self-preservation. Consider this. Margaret never apologised. Not during the trial, not in her memoir, not on television appearances. She refused to perform the contrition society demanded, declined to play the reformed sinner seeking redemption. This, perhaps more than the photographs themselves, is why Britain never forgave her. Consider this. Margaret's life was shaped by trauma we're only beginning to understand. A teenage abortion performed in secret, 8 miscarriages, a stillborn child, a 40-foot fall down an elevator shaft that may have caused traumatic brain injury, a series of men who saw her as ornament, bank account, trophy. Is it any wonder she sought control where she could find it? Is it any wonder she pursued pleasure when so much of her life had been pain? In 2021, the BBC and Amazon produced A Very British Scandal, starring Claire Foy as Margaret. The series attempts to reframe her story, to show the misogyny behind the judgment, the cruelty behind the scandal. Whether it succeeds is debatable, but its existence proves Margaret remains fascinating. a woman who refuses to stay buried, whose story keeps demanding reconsideration. Margaret herself once said, "Always a poodle, only a poodle, that and 3 strands of pearls." Together, they are absolutely the essential things in life. On the surface, this sounds frivolous, the vapid declaration of a woman who cared only for appearances. But read it again. Margaret is telling us exactly what her world valued: breeding and beauty, pedigree and presentation. She mastered both. She played the game better than almost anyone. And when the game turned on her, when those same society pages that celebrated her beauty condemned her sexuality, she refused to pretend she hadn't understood the rules all along. Margaret Campbell was many things: vain, difficult, often cold, occasionally cruel. She was also courageous, loyal, resilient, and utterly unwilling to perform the feminine weakness her culture demanded. She survived an elevator fall that should have killed her. She survived 8 miscarriages. She survived a stillbirth. She survived 3 marriages, including one to a man who weaponized her private life against her. She survived scandal that would have destroyed lesser people. What she couldn't survive was history. The judge's words, completely promiscuous, wholly immoral, followed her to the grave and beyond. The photograph stolen from her locked drawer became her epitaph. The Dirty Duchess title obliterated every other thing she'd been: daughter, mother, wife, survivor. But perhaps, finally, history is catching up. Perhaps we're ready to see Margaret Campbell not as the monster Britain created, but as the woman she actually was: complicated, flawed, human. A woman who made mistakes, but also made choices in an era when women weren't supposed to choose. A woman who paid for those choices with everything she had and refused, until her last breath, to say she was sorry. The locked drawer has been open for 60 years. The photographs have been examined and re-examined. The scandal has been dissected and dramatized and debated. And still, Margaret Campbell remains enigmatic. Still, she keeps her secrets. Still, she refuses to be simple. Maybe that's her final victory. Maybe that's her revenge. Maybe in the end, Margaret understood something we're only beginning to grasp: that a woman who refuses to apologize for living is the most dangerous woman of all. The pearls she wore in those photographs, those 3 infamous strands, were found in her belongings after she died. Along with them, correspondence, photographs, memories of a life lived at full volume in a world that demanded women whisper. She left no confession, no explanation, no apology, just one final message, written in the margins of history: I was here. I lived. I refused to disappear. And 60 years after the scandal that should have erased her, Margaret Campbell, the Dirty Duchess, is still here, still talked about, still defying us to look away, still, impossibly, winning.